She asked for the house, so I gave it to her. I slid the deed across the dining room table on a Sunday afternoon, right between the sweet potato pie and the half-empty pitcher of lemonade. And I watched Dorothy Sinclair pick it up with both hands, the way she picked up everything that she believed already belonged to her. She didn't look at me when she took it. She never did. But she looked at me after she read it. And that look, that specific particular look, is the reason I'm telling you this story today. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here for this. The house on Arden Mill Court was never supposed to be a battleground. It was a 1940s craftsman bungalow in the Kirkwood neighborhood of Atlanta. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors the color of dark honey, a covered front porch with enough space for 2 rocking chairs and a small table between them. The kind of house that exhales when you walk through the front door. The kind that holds light in the afternoon like it was built specifically for that purpose. I found it on a Tuesday in March. I was on my lunch break eating a turkey sandwich in my car outside the Fulton County Health Department, where I worked as a senior policy analyst, scrolling through Zillow the way you do when you're not quite ready to admit you're actually looking. The listing had been up for 4 days. The asking price was $387,000. The photos showed crown molding in the living room and a clawfoot tub in the main bathroom, and a backyard with a fig tree that was already old when the neighborhood was young. I called my best friend Renee before I called Marcus. "That porch is going to change your life," she said before I'd finished describing it. She was right. I just didn't know yet in which direction. Marcus and I had been married for 2 years at that point. We'd been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur, perfectly fine, perfectly neutral, the kind of space that belongs to no one in particular. Marcus liked it because it was low maintenance. I had started to feel like I was storing my life there rather than living it. We'd talked about buying something eventually in the abstract way that married couples talk about things they both want but haven't made real yet. What made it real was my grandmother. Grandma Cecile died the previous October at 81 years old, in the same house in Savannah where she had raised 4 children and outlasted one husband and every single person who had ever underestimated her. She left me $340,000. Not my mother, not my aunts. Me, because she told my mother the week before she passed, Isabella is the one who shows up. She wasn't wrong. I had driven to Savannah every 3rd weekend for the last 4 years of her life. I had sat with her through 2 rounds of physical therapy and 1 hospitalization and the slow, quiet renegotiation that happens when a fiercely independent woman begins to need help. I hadn't done it for the money. I hadn't known about the money. I'd done it because she was my grandmother. And because the sound of her voice telling stories about growing up in coastal Georgia was something I was not ready to lose. When the lawyer read the will, I had to excuse myself to the hallway. I stood there for a long time with my back against the wall and my eyes on the ceiling, doing the specific kind of crying that has no sound to it. I used $340,000 to buy the house on Arden Mill Court. I paid cash, no mortgage, no cosigner. No one's name on that deed but mine. A decision my own attorney, a quiet woman named Patricia Osei, who had been practicing real estate law in Atlanta for 23 years, recommended without hesitation. "You brought the funds," Patricia told me, sliding the paperwork across her desk. "You maintain the asset. That's clean. That's protected. Don't complicate it." I told Marcus that night over dinner. He nodded, said it made sense, said he was proud of me. He meant it. Marcus was not a complicated man when it came to money. He trusted me with it, the way he trusted me with most things, which was to say fully and without needing to understand every detail. Dorothy found out 3 days later. I don't know who told her. I suspect it was Marcus's older brother Gerald, who had a habit of knowing things before he was supposed to, and deploying that knowledge at the least useful moment. But however she found out. And she called Marcus at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning while he was still in the shower. And by the time he came downstairs with his hair still damp, she had already called back twice. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen. "Mama, it's fine." Pause. "Mama, Isabella bought it with her own money." Longer pause. That's not how it works." The longest pause of all. "I'll talk to you later." He came into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the counter for a moment before he looked at me. "She wants to come see the house," he said. "I know," I said. What I didn't say was that I had already felt somewhere in the region of my sternum the particular shift that happens when something you love is about to be contested. I had felt it the moment I heard Dorothy's voice through the phone from across the kitchen, clipped and certain, the voice of a woman who had decided something. I poured my own coffee. I looked out the window at the fig tree in the backyard. It was just beginning to come into leaf. Dorothy Sinclair came to see the house on a Saturday morning in April, 11 days after we got the keys. She arrived 20 minutes early. I know because I was still in the backyard pulling weeds from around the base of the fig tree when I heard Marcus open the front door. And when I checked my phone, it was 9:40. We had said 10 o'clock. I had specifically said 10 o'clock because I had wanted the kitchen cleaned and the floors swept and the good throw pillows arranged on the couch before she walked in, not to impress her, but because I understood already that Dorothy Sinclair cataloged every detail of every space she entered and filed it away for later use. I came inside with dirt on my knees and met her in the living room. She was standing in the center of it, not moving the way you stand in a room when you are measuring it rather than admiring it. She had on a cream-colored blouse and pressed slacks, and her reading glasses hanging from their beaded chain. And she was looking at the crown molding the way an appraiser looks at crown molding, not with appreciation, but with calculation. "It's smaller than I expected," she said. Not to me, to Marcus. "It's 1,200 square feet," I said. "For Atlanta, in this neighborhood, that's—" "I know what Atlanta real estate looks like, Isabella." She said my name the way she always said it, with a faint extra syllable at the end, Isabella, as if the name itself required correction. Marcus grew up in a house twice this size. Marcus grew up in a house in College Park that his parents had rented for 19 years and never owned, but I did not say that. I smiled and offered her coffee and showed her the clawfoot tub and the original hardwood floors and the covered front porch where the 2 rocking chairs were already in place. She sat in one of them. She rocked twice. She looked out at Arden Mill Court and said, "Marcus should have his name on this house." I let the sentence sit in the air between us for a moment. "The house is in my name," I said. "I purchased it with my inheritance." "Family money should build family property," she said. "That's how it works. Grandma Cecile left that money to me specifically. And you're Marcus's wife." She looked at me then directly for the first time that morning. "What's yours is his. That's what marriage means." I held her gaze. I'll keep that in mind. That was the first conversation. There were others. By June, Dorothy was coming by the house without calling first. Not every week irregular enough that I couldn't establish a pattern frequent enough that I felt her presence in rooms she hadn't entered yet. She would let herself in through the unlocked back door while Marcus was at work saying she was in the neighborhood, saying she just wanted to drop something off. She reorganized the pantry once while I was in a work call upstairs. I came down to find my spices sorted alphabetically in a row along the counter, the way she kept hers, not the way I kept mine. I put them back. She moved them again 2 weeks later. Small things. The kind of things that are individually too minor to raise without sounding unhinged, but collectively constitute a message. The pantry. The way she referred to the second bedroom as Marcus's office in conversations with other family members as if the room had been assigned by someone with authority. The afternoon, she brought her sister Vera to the house without asking and gave her a tour, narrating as she walked. The floors are original, they need refinishing. The backyard is small, but Marcus is going to put in a deck. I was standing right there when she said it. But the moment that lodged in me, the one I kept returning to in quiet, happened on a Thursday evening in late July. I came home from work to find Dorothy in my kitchen making a pot of her chicken and rice. The smell hit me at the front door, thyme and bay leaf. And something else underneath it. Something territorial. She had moved the ceramic bowl my grandmother had made by hand and sent me the year before she died. The bowl had been sitting in the center of the kitchen island since the day I unpacked it. It was ochre and hand-thrown and slightly imperfect on one side in a way that Grandma Cecile had laughed about. "That's the side with character," she'd said. Dorothy had moved it to the top of the refrigerator. Out of the way, out of sight, making room for her pot. I picked up the bowl and held it for a moment, felt the slight imperfection under my thumb on the left side. The side with character. And I carried it to the living room and set it on the bookshelf where I could see it from the couch. Dorothy watched me do it from the stove. She didn't say anything, neither did I. But something shifted in me that evening that did not shift back. Something that had been patient became something else. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. The kind that arrives quietly and then refuses to leave. I ate Dorothy's chicken and rice for dinner that night and told her it was good because it was good, and helped her wash the dishes after and waved from the porch when she backed out of the driveway. Then I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and started pulling property records for Fulton County. I didn't know yet what I was looking for. I just knew I was looking. I found out about the meeting on a Wednesday, which was the kind of day that looks ordinary right up until it isn't. Renee texted me at 2:17 in the afternoon. I was in a budget review meeting on the 4th floor of the Fulton County Health Department, half listening to a presentation about Q3 expenditure forecasts, when my phone lit up on the table beside my notebook. I glanced at it the way you glance at your phone when you're in a meeting, quickly, guiltily intending to look away. I did not look away. The text was a screenshot. Renee had a cousin named Deja who had married into the Sinclair family 6 years ago and had never quite been absorbed by it. She existed at the edges of their gatherings, pleasant and observant, the kind of woman who notices things and files them away without announcing it. Deja was in the Sinclair family group chat. Renee was not. But Deja had a habit, when something seemed important, of forwarding things to Renee without comment. Just the screenshot, no explanation. Renee had the same habit with me. The screenshot was a message from Dorothy to the Sinclair family group chat sent at 11:54 that morning. It read, "Sunday dinner at Gerald's. 4 p.m. Marcus, come alone. We need to talk about the property situation. This is a family matter, and it needs a family solution." I read it 3 times. Come alone. Property situation. Family solution. I set my phone face down on the table and looked at the Q3 expenditure chart on the projector screen for a long moment. Someone was saying something about line items. I nodded. I picked up my pen and wrote the words "property situation" in the margin of my notebook, and then drew a box around them, which is something I do when I'm trying to keep my face neutral. I did not tell Marcus about the screenshot that night. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I handed it to him, because Marcus's way of handling his mother was to absorb her pressure until it redistributed somewhere else, and the somewhere else was usually me. He loved her, and he feared disappointing her in the specific way that firstborn sons feared disappointing mothers who sacrificed visibly and kept the receipts. That fear made him slow. I could not afford slow. On Thursday morning, I called Patricia Osei. Patricia picked up on the second ring. I had called her twice since closing, once about a property tax question, once about a neighbor's fence that was 6 inches over the property line, and both times she had answered with the same unhurried efficiency, as if my call was the one she had been waiting for. I told her what I knew. The group chat message, the phrase property situation, the months of small incursions, the pantry, the unannounced visits, the way Dorothy referred to the house in conversation. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. "The deed is clean," she said. "Your name, no encumbrances, purchased with documented funds from a probated estate. There's no legal mechanism by which your mother-in-law can compel a transfer of ownership." "I know that," I said. "I'm not worried about what she can do legally. I'm worried about what she's going to ask Marcus to do." Another pause. Longer this time. "Pull the Fulton County property records for any real estate ever held in the name Dorothy Sinclair or Dorothy Mae Watkins," Patricia said. Watkins was her maiden name. "I handled a title search for a client with Sinclair family connections 3 years ago peripherally. There was something in the records that struck me as unusual at the time. I didn't pursue it because it wasn't relevant to my client. It may be relevant to you. I wrote down Dorothy Mae Watkins in my notebook. I put a box around that too." "What was unusual about it?" I asked. "Pull the records first," she said. "Then call me back." I pulled the records that night after Marcus fell asleep. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of chamomile tea that went cold before I drank it, working through the Fulton County Property Appraiser's database with the methodical patience of someone who has spent 8 years doing policy research and understands that the truth is almost always in the footnotes. It took me 40 minutes to find the first thread. It took me another 2 hours to follow it to where it ended. By midnight, I had 3 browser tabs open and a legal pad covered in handwritten notes, and a feeling in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but something that sits in the hallway between them. The feeling of understanding, finally the full shape of a thing you had only seen the edges of before. Sunday came. Marcus came home from Gerald's house at 7:43 in the evening. I know the exact time because I was on the porch when his headlights turned onto Arden Mill Court, sitting in one of the rocking chairs with a glass of water, having decided an hour earlier that I was not going to be found inside when he arrived. He got out of the car slowly. He had the particular posture of a man who has been through something and is trying to decide how to carry it into his own home. He sat down in the other rocking chair. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. "She wants the house transferred into a family trust," he said finally, "with her as the managing trustee." I nodded slowly. "What did you say?" "I said I needed to talk to you." "And Gerald?" A beat. "Gerald thinks it makes sense, from a legacy-building perspective." He said the last 3 words, with a faint flatness that told me he was quoting someone. I looked out at the street. A car passed. The fig tree at the side of the house was visible from the porch. In the dark, just barely a dense shape against the lighter dark of the sky. "Okay," I said. "Okay, you'll think about it, or..." "Okay, I heard you," I said. "I'll handle it." He looked at me then. Something in my voice had landed differently than he expected. Not sharp, not upset, something quieter than either of those things, and quieter was what unsettled him. "Isabella, I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it. "Go inside. I'll be there in a minute." He went inside. I sat on the porch for another 20 minutes, listening to the neighborhood settle into night, and I thought about a document I had found at 11:47 the previous Thursday, filed in the Fulton County Courthouse records under case number 2-011, CV-04872, bearing the notarized signature of Dorothy Mae Sinclair Nee Watkins, dated March 14, 2011. I thought about what that document meant, and I thought about how long she had been playing a game she believed no one else knew the rules to. The thing about going still is that people mistake it for surrender. I have noticed this my entire life. When I stop arguing, people assume they have won. When I stop reacting, people assume I have nothing left to react with. It is a mistake I have never corrected because the misunderstanding has always been more useful to me than the correction would have been. Dorothy Sinclair made that mistake in August. After the Sunday dinner at Gerald's, after Marcus came home with his careful posture and his borrowed language about legacy building, I did not bring it up again. Not that night, not the following week, not at the Sinclair family cookout on the last Saturday of August, where Dorothy presided over the potato salad. And Gerald's wife Nadine kept refilling my glass of sweet tea with the specific attentiveness of a woman who felt guilty about something. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I helped carry platters inside when it started to drizzle. Dorothy watched me all afternoon with a kind of cautious satisfaction, the way you watch a situation you believe you have already resolved. I watched the fig tree in the backyard and thought about documents. The document Patricia had pointed me toward was a voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights filed in Fulton County Superior Court in March of 2011 under a civil case that had been opened and closed in the same calendar year. The case involved the estate of Raymond Alton Sinclair Marcus's father, who had died in January of 2011 after a short illness, leaving behind a modest but real estate portfolio. 3 properties in the College Park and East Point area of Atlanta, assessed collectively at somewhere between $380,000 and $420,000 at 2011 values. The filing was straightforward on its face. Dorothy had signed away her spousal claim to 2 of the 3 properties in exchange for a lump sum payment of $127,500 drawn from the estate's liquid assets. The 3rd property, a duplex on Delmar Avenue in East Point, had been transferred into a family trust with Marcus and Gerald, listed as eventual beneficiaries managed by a third-party trustee, named in the document as Howard B. Creech, attorney at law. What was not straightforward was this: Marcus did not know. I was certain of it. Not because Marcus was careless, he wasn't, but because he had told me in the early months of our relationship that his father had left very little behind. Some debt, a little savings, not much else. He had said it without bitterness, the way you state a fact you've made peace with. He had no reason to lie to me about it. He had every reason to believe what his mother had told him. $127,500 in 2011. Paid to Dorothy directly from the estate. Signed away quietly, notarized, filed, closed. I spent 2 evenings on the phone with Patricia going through the implications. She was precise and unhurried the way she was about everything, walking me through what the document did and did not mean. It doesn't mean she stole from her sons, Patricia said on the second call. She had legal spousal rights to those assets. She was entitled to negotiate their transfer. She told Marcus there was nothing, I said. That's a conversation between a mother and her son, Patricia said. Not a legal matter. The duplex on Delmar Avenue, I said. Is it still in the trust? A pause. I looked into that. The trustee, Howard Creech, retired in 2019. The trust was administratively dissolved in 2020 due to inactivity and failure to maintain required filings. The duplex was sold at that point. The proceeds... She paused again, and I heard the faint sound of papers went to the named trustee's escrow account during dissolution. Marcus and Gerald were notified by certified mail. Marcus never mentioned a certified letter about a property. No, Patricia said. I don't imagine he did. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. There were 2 possibilities. Either Marcus had received a certified letter about the dissolution of his father's trust and had forgotten it or set it aside without understanding what it meant possible for a man who found paperwork deeply uninteresting. Or the letter had gone somewhere else. A previous address. An address that Dorothy might have been monitoring. I did not know which it was. I was not ready to ask Marcus yet. because asking Marcus meant showing him what I had found. And showing him what I had found meant the conversation would become about his mother and his grief and his complicated inheritance of both. And I needed it to stay for a little while longer about the house. In the second week of September, I drove to the Fulton County Courthouse on Pryor Street during my lunch break and requested a certified copy of case number 2011 CV04872. The clerk printed it while I waited. 7 pages. Dorothy's signature on page 6, notarized by a woman named Bernice K. Tatum. Dated March 14th, 2011, 3 days after what would have been Raymond Sinclair's 62nd birthday. I folded the document into thirds and put it in the inside pocket of my work bag next to my granddaughter Cecile's photograph. The one from 1987, the one where she is standing on her front porch in Savannah with her arms crossed and her head tilted slightly and her expression communicating without ambiguity that she has already seen whatever is coming and has decided how to meet it. I had that photograph printed at the Walgreens on Ponce de Leon and laminated at the FedEx on North Highland. And it had been in my bag every day for 2 years. And I touched it now, the way you touch something that reminds you of who you are. Then I drove back to work and ate my lunch at my desk and responded to 14 emails and sat in a 3 o'clock meeting about community health access metrics and did not think about Dorothy Sinclair at all for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, I bought a manila envelope at the CVS near our house and put the courthouse document inside it. I wrote nothing on the outside. I put it in the back of the junk drawer in the kitchen, the drawer where we kept takeout menus and spare batteries and the Allen wrench set from when we assembled the bookshelf. And I pushed it to the back behind a flashlight we had never used. It sat there for 6 weeks. I was not waiting for Dorothy to make her move. I knew her move was already in motion. I was waiting for the moment, the specific, unrepeatable moment, when the move was fully committed. When there was no ambiguity about what she had intended, what she had demanded, what she believed she was entitled to take. I have learned from years of policy work and from watching my grandmother navigate 8 decades of a world that underestimated her that timing is the only thing you cannot recover if you spend it too early. So I waited. And I kept the house clean. And every morning, I moved my grandmother's ochre bowl back to the center of the kitchen island, where it belonged. They came on a Tuesday. I want to be specific about that because Tuesday is not a day people choose for important confrontations. Saturdays are for confrontations. Sundays after church, when everyone is dressed well and God is fresh in the room, those are for confrontations. Tuesday is a work day. Tuesday is ordinary. I think Dorothy chose Tuesday precisely because of that, because an ordinary day suggests an ordinary conversation, and she wanted me off balance before she started. I was working from home that afternoon. I had a 2 o'clock call with the State Health Commissioner's office that ended at 2:47, and I was still at my desk in the second bedroom with my headset around my neck. And my notes open on the laptop when I heard the front door. Marcus was not home. He knew they were coming. I found that out later. I heard Dorothy's voice first, then Gerald's lower, deliberate, the voice of a man who has rehearsed his part. I heard the particular sound of the house, receiving people who walk into it like they own it, footsteps that don't hesitate at the threshold, that don't pause to read the space before entering it. I closed my laptop. I took off my headset. I set it on the desk next to the photograph of Grandma Cecile. Then I walked downstairs. Dorothy was in the living room. Gerald was beside her, slightly behind, in the configuration of a second, who has been brought to lend weight rather than to speak. He was wearing a collared shirt, which meant this had been planned as a formal occasion. Dorothy had on her good earrings, the gold ones she wore to church and to situations she considered significant. She looked at me when I came down the stairs. No greeting, no performance of warmth. "We need to talk about this house," she said. I sat down in the armchair across from her. I did not offer them anything to drink. I folded my hands in my lap. and looked at her and waited. She took that as permission to begin. What followed was 11 minutes, I know, because I checked my phone afterward. And I had received a text from Renee at 3:04 and another at 3:15. And the conversation was still happening at 3:15 of Dorothy Sinclair explaining in the measured cadence of someone who has organized their thoughts carefully why the house on Arden Mill Court should be transferred into the Sinclair Family Trust. She talked about legacy. She talked about what Raymond would have wanted. She talked about the importance of generational wealth and how property is the foundation of it, and how a family's assets should be held collectively managed by people with the family's long-term interests at heart. She talked about how Marcus had grown up understanding these values and how it was important that his home reflected them. She did not say my name once during those 11 minutes. Gerald nodded at intervals. He added once that it was simply a matter of structure, not about anyone's rights, just about doing things correctly. He said this with the confidence of a man who has been told he is the reasonable one in the room. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "Dorothy, whose name is on the deed to this house." A pause. "Technically, whose name?" "Isabella." She said it flatly. "But, and who purchased this house?" "You used your inheritance, yes, but..." "With money left to me specifically by name in a probated will." "That money came into this family when you married Marcus," Gerald said. "That's how." "That money came into my bank account," I said, "when my grandmother died." I looked at him steadily. It was never Marcus's money. It was never Sinclair family money. It was Cecile Thornton's money. And she gave it to me, and I used it to buy this house. And my name is on the deed. Dorothy's jaw tightened. She had a way of pressing her lips together when she was recalibrating, not retreating, just finding the next angle. I had watched her do it at enough family dinners to recognize it. "You are Marcus's wife," she said. "Everything you have is part of this family." "Then everything Marcus has is part of my family," I said. "Should I call my mother and let her know she has a claim on his retirement account?" Gerald made a sound. Dorothy silenced him with a look. Then she leaned forward slightly, and her voice dropped into something lower, something she had been saving. "You were never really one of us, Isabella." There it was. I had been waiting for it, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I knew it was there. Had known since the first Sunday she came to this house and stood in the center of my living room and measured the crown molding with her eyes. It had been in the room at every family dinner, every unannounced visit, every time she moved my grandmother's bowl. It was the actual thing, the thing beneath the legacy talk and the trust structure and the property rights, the simple, irreducible fact of what she thought of me. I looked at her for a long moment. "I know," I said. She blinked. That was not what she had expected. "I've known for a while," I said. "And I want you to know that it has no effect on what I'm about to tell you." I stood up from the armchair, not quickly, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who has decided something. "This house is mine. It will remain mine. There will be no trust, no transfer, no family solution." I looked at Gerald. "And I would strongly encourage both of you to think carefully about how you proceed from here. Because I've been thinking carefully about it for quite some time." Dorothy stood up too, full height. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's an advisement." She held my gaze for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, not quite fear, not quite anger, something more complex than either. The expression of a person who has just heard a note in the music they don't recognize and are not sure whether to be concerned. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm aware." They left at 3:22. I know because I checked. I stood at the front window, and watched Gerald's silver Buick back out of my driveway and ease down Arden Mill Court and disappear around the corner. Then I went to the kitchen and drank a full glass of water standing at the sink looking out at the fig tree. Then I opened the junk drawer. I didn't take the envelope out. I just looked at it, the plain manila rectangle sitting behind the flashlight, and put my hand on it for a moment, feeling the edge of the folded courthouse document inside. 6 weeks it had been sitting there. It only needed to sit a little longer. The thing about a secret is that it has weight. Not metaphorical weight, actual physical weight, the kind you feel in a room when someone is carrying one. I had spent enough years doing policy research, sitting across tables from county officials and state administrators and people whose job it was to present one version of a situation while managing another to know what that weight feels like. It sits in the pauses. It lives in the places where a person's story should connect, and doesn't quite the hairline fractures in a narrative that has been maintained for so long it has started to feel true, even to the person telling it. Dorothy Sinclair had been carrying hers for 12 years. I want to be precise about what I found, because precision matters here. I am not a lawyer. I am a senior policy analyst who knows how to read documents and follow threads and ask the right questions of the right people. And what I found was not a crime. Patricia had been clear about that, but it was a truth, and it was a truth that changed the shape of everything. Raymond Alton Sinclair had died on January 9, 2011, of a cardiac event at 61 years old in the house in College Park where Marcus had grown up. He had been a soft-spoken man by all accounts. Marcus described him as someone who listened more than he spoke, who kept his thoughts close, who expressed love through action rather than declaration. He had worked for the city of Atlanta for 27 years in the Public Works Department. He had saved carefully. He had, over the course of his working life, acquired 3 properties, in addition to the family home, the 2 houses in College Park, and the duplex on Delmar Avenue in East Point. Modest investments made slowly, maintained quietly, the kind of asset building that doesn't look like wealth until you add it up. When he died, those properties were worth collectively somewhere between $380,000 and $420,000. Marcus knew none of this. I was now completely certain. The second thread I had pulled after the courthouse document, after the voluntary relinquishment, was a chain of certified mail records that Patricia had helped me locate through a title search she ran as part of what she billed carefully as a routine due diligence inquiry. The records showed that in 2020, when the Delmar Avenue Trust was administratively dissolved, 2 certified letters had been sent to Marcus Darnell Sinclair I, to an address in Decatur that had been his apartment before we moved in together, one to a post office box in College Park. Marcus had never had a post office box in College Park. Dorothy had. I confirmed it through a forwarding address record that Patricia found attached to a 2019 utility account. The kind of administrative footprint that accumulates when you manage multiple properties and doesn't disappear cleanly when you stop. The P.O. box had been opened in Dorothy's name in 2012, the year after Raymond died, and maintained through at least 2021. Someone had given that address as a secondary contact for Marcus on the trust paperwork. I sat with that for 3 days before I called Patricia back. "Is it possible," I said, "that she intercepted correspondence meant for Marcus about his father's estate?" Patricia was quiet for longer than she usually was. "It's possible that someone listed an incorrect secondary address on the trust administration paperwork," she said carefully. Whether that was intentional or administrative error would be very difficult to establish at this point. But the effect was that Marcus never received notification about the trust dissolution. The effect, Patricia said, was that Marcus did not, to your knowledge, act on that notification. Whether he received it is a separate question. Patricia. A pause. The P.O. box was in her name. The address was listed on his paperwork. The proceeds from the duplex sale went to the trustee's escrow during dissolution. There's no record of those proceeds being distributed to the named beneficiaries." She stopped. "I want to be very careful about what I say next, Isabella." "Say it." "The trust dissolution happened during a period of significant administrative backlog in Fulton County, partly COVID-related. Records from that period are incomplete in places. What I can tell you with confidence is that Marcus Sinclair does not appear to have received any financial benefit from his father's estate, beyond what his mother chose to tell him about." A beat. And what she chose to tell him was that there was nothing. I wrote that down on my legal pad. Nothing. $127, $500 cash. 2 properties transferred. 1 duplex sold in trust dissolution. Proceeds unaccounted for. Marcus told nothing. I looked at the numbers for a long time. Then, I looked at the courthouse document. I had pulled the voluntary relinquishment page 6 Dorothy's signature. And I thought about what it meant that a woman who had liquidated her late husband's estate, quietly and completely over the course of 9 years, was now sitting in my living room talking about legacy, about generational wealth, about family property being held collectively for the long-term benefit of people with the family's interests at heart. The audacity of it was in a specific and terrible way impressive. I called Renee that night. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her enough. And Renee, who had a gift for distilling complex situations into their essential truth, was quiet for a moment, and then said, "So she spent the inheritance, and now she wants yours." I hadn't framed it that way. But she wasn't wrong. "What are you going to do?" Renee asked. "I'm going to give her exactly what she asked for," I said. Renee knew me well enough to understand that this was not a concession. "When?" she said. "When she asks in front of everyone," I said. "I want witnesses." There was a pause on the line, and then Renee made a sound, not quite a laugh, something quieter and more satisfied, and said, "Okay, I'll be there." I told her when the next family dinner was. I told her to come early and sit near the window. I told her to bring her reading glasses because there would be something worth reading. Then I went to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and took out the manila envelope for the first time since I'd put it there. I opened it, unfolded the courthouse document, read it once more, from beginning to end slowly, the way you read something you want to be absolutely certain of before you use it. Page 6. Dorothy May Sinclair, Nee Watkins. Notarized March 14th, 2011. I folded it back into thirds. Then I took a second sheet of paper, plain white, from the printer in the second bedroom, and I wrote on it, in my own handwriting, in the careful block letters I used when I wanted something to be legible and permanent. "You signed away your family." I signed mine in. I put both documents back in the envelope. I sealed it. I wrote nothing on the outside. I put it back in the junk drawer behind the flashlight, and I went to bed and slept for the first time in weeks without waking in the middle of the night. The Sunday it happened was the first weekend in October. Atlanta in early October is a particular kind of beautiful, the heat finally releasing its grip, the light going golden and lateral in the late afternoon, the air carrying something cooler underneath it that reminds you the year is turning. The fig tree in my backyard had gone quiet for the season, its leaves beginning to yellow at the edges, the last of the fruit long gone. I had noticed it that morning when I took my coffee to the back steps, and I had thought, without planning to, that it looked like a tree that had finished what it came to do and was resting now without apology. I had made the invitation myself. 2 weeks earlier, after the Tuesday confrontation with Dorothy and Gerald, I had called Marcus's Aunt Paulette Raymond's younger sister, the one family member who had always treated me with uncomplicated warmth, and suggested a Sunday dinner at our house. A proper one. I mentioned that I'd been wanting to host for a while, that the house was finally feeling settled, that it would be nice to have everyone together in the space. Paulette loved any reason for a gathering. She made 3 calls, and within 48 hours, it was on the family calendar. Dorothy could not decline without explanation. Renee arrived at 1:30, 2.5 hours before anyone else. She came through the back door with a bottle of sparkling water and her reading glasses in her breast pocket, and the specific expression she wore when she was prepared for something focused, almost serene. The face of a woman who has been told the plan and approved of it entirely. She sat at the kitchen island and watched me finish the potato salad and did not ask unnecessary questions. That is one of the things I love most about Renee. She understands when questions are beside the point. "Where is it?" she said once. I nodded toward the junk drawer. She nodded back and didn't say anything else. People began arriving at 4. Paulette came first with her husband Jerome and their daughter Kezia, who was 17 and spent most of the evening on her phone, but helped carry dishes without being asked, which I appreciated. Gerald and Nadine arrived together. Gerald in another collared shirt, Nadine with a pan of her cornbread, and the guilty attentiveness she'd been directing at me since the cookout. Marcus's cousin Damon came, and his girlfriend, whose name I always had to remind myself was Stephanie, not Serena. Dorothy arrived at 4:18. She came in through the front door, which she always used when there were witnesses, the back door being reserved for the visits she preferred not to announce. She had on a deep burgundy dress and her good earrings, and she brought a sweet potato pie which she carried into the kitchen herself, and set on the counter with the proprietary ease of someone depositing something in their own space. She looked at my grandmother's ochre bowl in the center of the island and said nothing. Renee looked at Dorothy from her seat at the island and said, "Dorothy, that pie looks beautiful." Dorothy said, "Thank you, Renee," in the tone she used for people she had categorized as peripheral. The dinner went the way Sinclair family dinners went, loud and layered, multiple conversations running simultaneously. Food passed and praised and argued over Jerome telling a story about a parking situation at the Home Depot on Howell Mill that expanded with each retelling, Kezia laughing at something on her phone. It was taken on its own terms a good evening. The house held it well. I had always believed it would. Marcus sat at the head of the table and was happy in the uncomplicated way he was happy when his family was around him, open, warm, slightly louder than usual. I watched him from my seat and felt alongside everything else I was carrying that evening a genuine tenderness for him. He did not know what was coming. He did not know what I had found. He would before this evening was over, and when I had thought carefully about what that meant and decided that the knowing was something he needed, even if the way it arrived was not what either of us would have chosen. Dessert was on the table when Dorothy made her move. She had waited, I realized, for the moment, when everyone was settled and comfortable, when the food had softened the room, and the conversation had slowed into the easy register of people who have eaten well. She had timed it with the precision of someone who understood that a room full of people who have just shared a meal is a room that wants harmony, a room that will lean toward resolution rather than conflict if given the choice. She set down her fork. "I want to talk about something," she said in the voice she used for announcements. The table quieted in the way tables quiet when a matriarch speaks. "This is a beautiful home." She looked around at the crown molding the hardwood floors, the October light coming through the windows. "Raymond would have loved it." A pause precisely calibrated. "And it's important to me that it stays in the family, that it's protected, that Marcus has a real stake in what he's building here." Paulette made a murmuring sound of agreement. Jerome nodded. "I've been in conversation with Gerald," Dorothy continued, "about establishing a proper family structure for this property. A trust with Marcus as primary beneficiary and the family's long-term interests protected." She looked at Marcus. "It's what your father would have wanted." The table was quiet. Marcus looked at me. I was already standing up. Not quickly, I want to be clear about that. I stood the way you stand when you have been waiting for a specific moment, and it has arrived exactly as you anticipated. Unhurried, certain. The way my grandmother used to stand when she had something to say and intended to say it completely. I went to the kitchen. I opened the junk drawer. I took out the manila envelope. I came back to the table. I set the envelope in front of Dorothy. "You asked for the house," I said. "So here's the deed." She looked at the envelope. She looked at me. She picked it up with both hands, the way she picked up everything she believed already belonged to her. She opened it. She pulled out the folded papers. She unfolded them. The first page was the deed. Her eyes moved across it quickly. She found my name where Marcus's should have been in her version of events, and her jaw tightened in the way it always tightened when she was recalibrating. Then she turned to the second page. I watched her eyes stop moving. I watched her read the same line 3 times. I watched the color slowly and completely leave her face. The table had gone very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of after dinner, a different kind, the kind that happens when a room senses that something real is occurring and holds its breath. Paulette said, "Dorothy, what is it?" Dorothy did not answer. Gerald reached across the table. "Mama, what?" He took the papers from her hands. He read. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, recognition, understanding, and then something that was not quite shame, but lived next to it. Marcus said, "What is that? What are those papers?" I looked at my husband across the table, the man I loved. The man who had spent 12 years believing his father had left nothing, and I said quietly and directly, the way you say something you have rehearsed, because it matters too much to improvise. "It's a document your mother signed in March of 2011, 3 months after your father died. I think it's time you read it." Marcus read it standing up. He had taken the papers from Gerald without looking at his brother, pulled them across the table toward himself, and stood there at the head of his own dinner table, reading a document about his father's estate, while the remains of Sunday dinner sat between us. All the picked-over sweet potato pie, the half-empty serving dishes, the October light going amber through the windows. He read slowly. Marcus always read slowly. He was the kind of person who moved through text the way he moved through most things, without rushing, making sure he understood before he moved on. I had always loved that about him. Right now, it meant that every person at that table sat in silence for 4 full minutes while he read, and the silence had a texture to it, a density that I'd never felt in a room before. Paulette had her hands folded on the table. She was looking at Dorothy. Dorothy was looking at nothing. She had a fixed point somewhere above the centerpiece, my grandmother's ochre bowl, which I had moved to the center of the dinner table for the occasion. And she was looking at it the way people look at something when they are not actually seeing it, when their eyes need somewhere to rest, while their mind does something else entirely. Gerald had pushed his chair back from the table by 3 or 4 inches. I noticed this because it was the exact gesture of a man who is preparing subconsciously to not be associated with what is happening. Nadine was very still. Kezia had put her phone face down on the table. She was 17, and she didn't fully understand what she was watching, but she understood enough to know it required attention. Marcus turned to the second page. He read it. He read it again. Then he set the papers down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something fragile, and he looked at his mother. 3 properties, he said. His voice was even. That was the thing about Marcus. When he was most upset, he became most quiet, the volume dropping in inverse proportion to the weight of what he was feeling. Dad had 3 properties. Dorothy said nothing. You told me he left debt. Still that even voice. You sat across from me at the kitchen table in College Park 2 weeks after the funeral, and you told me there was nothing, that the house had a second mortgage, and there were medical bills, and there was nothing left. Marcus, 2 properties transferred. One in a trust that was dissolved in 2020. He paused. I got a letter. The table moved. Not physically, but something shifted, a collective intake, the room recalibrating. I got a letter in 2020 inches, Marcus said slowly, working through it as he spoke, about a trust dissolution. I remember it. I thought it was junk mail. I thought... He stopped. The return address was a law firm in College Park. I almost threw it away. He looked at Gerald. Did you get one? Gerald looked at the tablecloth. Gerald. I got something, Gerald said. Mama said it was administrative, that it was already handled, that there was nothing to do. Already handled, Marcus repeated. Marcus. Dorothy's voice had found itself again lower than usual, stripped of the announcement cadence, something rawer underneath. Everything I did for this family. The medical bills were real. The mortgage was paid off, I said, quietly, from my seat. I checked the Fulton County property records. The College Park house mortgage was paid off in 2009, 2 years before your father died. The silence that followed that sentence was different from the silences before it. It had a specific quality, the quality of a room in which something that has been suspended for a long time has finally landed. Dorothy looked at me. It was the first time all evening she had looked at me directly, and in her expression I saw something I had not expected to see. Not anger, not the recalibrating tightness she usually met me with. Something older than that. Something that had been maintained for a long time, under considerable pressure, and was now in this room in front of these people releasing its hold. She looked tired. Not the tiredness of an evening. The tiredness of years. You don't understand, she said. And for the first time since I had known her, Dorothy Sinclair sounded like she was speaking to me rather than at me. You don't know what it was like. After Raymond died, what it cost, what I had to manage alone. I believe you, I said. And I meant it. I believe it was hard, and I believe you were alone. And I believe you made decisions under pressure that made sense to you at the time. I held her gaze. But you came into my home and told me it wasn't mine. You told your son his father left nothing. And those are two different things from whatever you were carrying after Raymond died. Gerald stood up. He didn't say anything. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and looked at his mother for a moment. A long, complicated look that contained 12 years of knowing something was wrong and choosing not to look at it directly. And then he walked to the front door and let himself out. Nadine said Gerald and then stopped. She looked at Dorothy. She looked at me. She folded her napkin and set it beside her plate with the careful precision of a woman deciding something. Then she stood up and followed her husband. The door closed. Paulette made a sound, not quite a word, something that began as one and didn't finish. She reached across the table and put her hand over Dorothy's. Dorothy looked at her sister-in-law's hand for a moment, and something in her face shifted again. A fracture in the composure she had been maintaining for so long, it had calcified into personality. Damon and Stephanie were already quietly gathering their things. Kezia looked at her mother. Jerome put his hand on Paulette's shoulder, and one by one, the room emptied with the gentle efficiency of people who understand that some conversations need space to finish. Marcus had not moved. He was still standing at the head of the table, with the papers in front of him, looking at his mother. His face was not angry, or rather, the anger was there. But it was underneath something larger, something more complicated. The expression of a man who is revising a significant portion of his understanding of his own life and doing it in real time, in front of witnesses with the debris of Sunday dinner around him. "Why?" he said. One word, the only one that mattered. Dorothy looked at her son for a long time. "I was afraid," she said finally. of what would happen if you had it and spent it, of what would happen to me if I gave it away and had nothing left. She paused. Your father was the one who knew how to hold things together. When he was gone, I didn't. She stopped, started again. I made a decision, and then I made another one to protect the first one. And then it became the story, Marcus said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The October light through the windows had gone from gold to the softer rose of early evening. The ochre bowl in the center of the table caught it and held it the slight imperfection on one side, glowing warm, the side with character. Marcus picked up the papers, folded them, and held them in his hand. He looked at me. In his eyes was something that would take a long time to fully name grief for his father's anger at his mother. Something directed at me that was not quite gratitude, but was adjacent to it, the complicated feeling of being shown a truth by the person you love and not being entirely sure how to receive it. I held his gaze and didn't look away. Then I stood up and began to clear the table, because the food was getting cold and the evening was not over, and the house was still standing as it had been standing all along, solid and certain under all of us. The week after that Sunday had a specific texture to it that I still think about sometimes. It was quiet in the way that follows something large, not the absence of noise, exactly, but the absence of pressure. The particular quality of air in a house after a window has been opened for the first time in a long time. I noticed it on Monday morning when I came downstairs to make coffee and stood at the kitchen island with my hands wrapped around my mug and felt for the first time in months that the house was simply mine, not contested, not measured, not waiting for the next incursion, just mine, in the ordinary and complete way it had been the day I first walked through the front door. Grandma Cecile's bowl was in the center of the island where it belonged. I touched the imperfect side with my thumb and drank my coffee and watched the fig tree through the window. Marcus took Monday off work. He told his office it was a personal day and spent most of it at the kitchen table with his laptop, pulling property records the way I had taught him to, following the threads I had already followed, and arriving at the same places with the slow, methodical patience of a man who needed to understand something completely before he could decide how to feel about it. I left him to it. I went to work, sat through my meetings, answered my emails, and came home at 6 to find him still at the table with 3 legal pads of notes and the particular stillness of someone who has finished processing and moved into something harder. He looked up when I came in. The duplex on Delmar, he said. The proceeds from the dissolution. Patricia is still looking into it, I said. The records from that period are incomplete. But they went somewhere. They went somewhere, I agreed. He nodded. He looked at his legal pad. I'm not going to pursue it legally, he said. I want you to know that. She's my mother. And whatever she took, whatever she held back, I don't think a courtroom is where I want to have that conversation. I know, I said. I never thought you would. I just needed to know the shape of it. I know that too. He looked at me for a long moment. How long did you know? 6 weeks, I said. From when I found the courthouse document to Sunday. Why didn't you tell me? I set my bag down and sat across from him at the kitchen table. Because if I had told you alone in this kitchen, it would have become about you and your mother and your grief about your father. And it needed to also be about this house, about what she was trying to do to this house. I held his gaze. I needed you to see both things at the same time. He was quiet for a while. That was calculated, he said. Yes, I said. It was. Another silence. Then, you were right. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He turned his hand over and held mine. We stayed like that for a while in the kitchen of our house while the evening came in through the windows. Gerald called on Wednesday. I know because Marcus took the call in the backyard, and I watched him through the kitchen window, the set of his shoulders, the way he stood with his weight on one foot, the gestures he made with his free hand when he was trying to explain something he found difficult. The call lasted 19 minutes. When he came back inside, he poured himself a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink. Gerald knew, he said. Not everything, but more than he admitted on Sunday. He set the glass down. He knew Dad had properties. He thought Mama had managed the sale of them and used the money for the family. He didn't know about the relinquishment document. He didn't know she'd been paid out separately. A pause. Or that's what he says. Do you believe him? Marcus thought about it. I believe he decided not to look too closely, he said. Which is not the same as not knowing, but it's also not the same as lying. What did he want? To apologize, to me. Not to you, he didn't ask about you. A faint flatness in his voice on that last sentence. I told him the apology needed to be bigger than a phone call and left it at that. Paulette came by on Thursday afternoon, unannounced, the first unannounced visitor to this house who had ever made me feel glad rather than braced. She brought flowers from the DeKalb Farmers Market, a mixed bunch with sunflowers and something purple I couldn't name, and she sat at the kitchen island and drank tea and talked about Raymond. She told me things I hadn't known. That he had been proud of Marcus in the specific way that quiet fathers are proud, not demonstratively, but thoroughly, the kind of pride that shapes decisions. That he had built his small property portfolio, one careful purchase at a time, over 20 years, believing that owning something real was the truest form of security he could provide. That he had talked in the last year of his life about wanting to leave his sons something solid. He would have been furious, Paulette said without drama, holding her mug. Not loud. Raymond was never loud, but furious. She looked at my grandmother's bowl on the island. That's beautiful, she said. My grandmother made it, I said. She had good hands. Paulette looked at me over the rim of her mug. So do you. Dorothy did not call that week, or the week after. The first contact came 12 days after Sunday in the form of a text to Marcus, 3 sentences formal. And careful, the language of someone who has drafted and redrafted, I've been thinking about what happened. I know I have things to answer for. I would like to talk when you're ready. Marcus showed it to me without comment. I read it and handed his phone back. What do you want to do? I asked. I don't know yet, he said. I need more time. Okay. She's still my mother. I know, I said. She'll still be your mother after you've had more time. He pocketed his phone. He looked at me with the expression he had worn on and off since Sunday, the one I'd decided to simply receive rather than try to interpret, because some things need to be felt completely before they can be named. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing it sooner, for the times she came into this house and he stopped. I let it go too many times. You did, I said, and I needed you to see it yourself. I couldn't hand that to you. I know. We're okay, I said. We're going to be okay. The neighborhood HOA sent a letter that week about fall gutter maintenance. I scheduled a cleaning for the following Saturday. I ordered 2 new cushions for the porch rocking chairs. The old ones had faded over the summer. I made an appointment with Patricia to update my estate planning documents, a task I had been meaning to do since closing and had never gotten to. Ordinary things, the things that accumulate into a life. On Saturday morning, I was in the backyard when I noticed the fig tree. New growth, tiny improbable, a few pale shoots at the base of the oldest branch. The tree doing quietly what fig trees do in the Georgia fall when the conditions are right, storing energy beginning again. I crouched down and looked at them for a long time. There is a thing my grandmother used to say which I've been turning over in my mind since the day she died, and will probably turn over for the rest of my life. She said it once when I was about 12 years old, sitting on her front porch in Savannah while she shelled butter beans into a bowl, not talking about anything in particular, just the two of us in the late afternoon. She said, "The things that are really yours don't need you to fight for them constantly. They just need you to know they're yours and act accordingly." I hadn't fully understood it then. I thought I had. I was 12, and I thought I understood most things. I understand it now. I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees and went inside to make breakfast, leaving the fig tree to do what fig trees do quietly without announcing itself, already preparing for the season ahead. 6 weeks after that Sunday dinner on a Thursday evening in mid-November, Dorothy Sinclair came to my house. She called first. That was new. She called Marcus at 4 in the afternoon and asked if she could come by after dinner around 7. Marcus came to find me in the second bedroom where I was working, and he stood in the doorway and said, "Mama wants to come over tonight. I told her I'd check with you." He had never said that before. I told her I'd check with you. 6 words that would have meant everything to me 2 years ago, that meant something different now. Not vindication exactly, but a quiet correction, the kind that doesn't announce itself. "She can come," I said. Dorothy arrived at 7:04. She came to the front door and rang the bell, which she had never done before. She had always let herself in through the front if there were witnesses, through the back if there weren't. I heard the bell from the kitchen where I was finishing the dishes. And I heard Marcus open the door. And I heard the brief exchange of a greeting that was careful on both sides, the greeting of two people who love each other and are currently navigating something difficult and are choosing for this evening to begin with care. I dried my hands. I went to the living room. Dorothy was sitting on the couch. She had on a gray cardigan and reading glasses and no good earrings, the everyday version of herself, which I had rarely seen. She looked smaller than she did in her burgundy dress, with her gold earrings and her announcement voice. She looked like a woman in her 60s, who was tired and had come somewhere to say something hard. She looked up when I came in. "Isabella," she said, just my name. All 4 syllables, even unhurried, no extra weight at the end. "Dorothy," I said. I sat in the armchair across from her. Marcus sat on the couch beside his mother, leaving space between them close enough to be present, far enough to make clear that this conversation was not his to conduct. Dorothy had her hands in her lap. She looked at them for a moment, then looked at me. "I have been sitting with what happened for 6 weeks, she said. "I've been trying to find the version of it where I was right, where what I did made sense, where I had justification." A pause. "I can find pieces of it. I can find the fear and the grief and the exhaustion of the year after Raymond died. I can find the moment where I made the first decision and then had to make every decision after it into a wall to protect the first one." She looked at me steadily. "But I cannot find the version where I was right about this house, or about you." The room was quiet. Outside, Arden Mill Court was settling into a November night, the particular silence of a neighborhood after dark when the leaves are down and the air has gone cold, and every lit window is its own small world. "I told myself you weren't family," Dorothy said. "I told myself the house was Sinclair property even before you bought it. I told myself—" She stopped, collected herself. "I told myself a lot of things about you that I used to excuse what I actually wanted, which was control over something in a life that had felt out of my control for a very long time." She paused. "That's not your burden, I know that. But I needed to say it out loud to you so you would know that I know it." I looked at her for a long moment. There were things I could have said. I had, over the past 6 weeks, composed several versions of what I might say to Dorothy Sinclair if she ever sat in my living room and said something like this. Some of those versions were sharp. Some were generous, Some were somewhere in the middle, the place where truth and grace negotiate the terms of coexistence. I chose the middle. I believe you, I said. And I want you to know something. I held her gaze. I did not do what I did on Sunday to hurt you. I did it because you were trying to take something that wasn't yours, and I needed you to understand why it wasn't yours. Completely. In a way that couldn't be revisited. Dorothy nodded, once slow. The document, she said. You found it on your own. I did. Patricia Osei helped you. She pointed me toward it. I found it. Something moved through Dorothy's expression, not quite a smile, but a recognition, the expression of a person who has just seen clearly and for the first time the full dimensions of someone they had underestimated. It lasted only a moment. Then it settled into something quieter. Raymond would have liked you, she said. I was not expecting that. I felt it land somewhere in my chest and stayed with it for a moment before I answered. Marcus talks about him sometimes, I said. The way he listened, the way he built things slowly. I paused. I think I would have liked him too. Marcus, beside his mother, was very still. Dorothy looked at her hands again. I have things to work out with Marcus, she said. About his father's estate, about what I did and didn't do. That's going to take time. She looked up. I'm not asking you to be part of that. I know that's between me and my son. A pause. But I'm asking if there's a way forward. For you and me. Not back to what we had, because what we had was not honest on my side. Something new. Something where I come to the front door and ring the bell. The November dark was full outside the windows. The fig tree was invisible from here, dormant now, waiting out the winter with the patience of something that has done this before and knows what follows. I thought about my grandmother on her porch in Savannah shelling butter beans, saying things that took 30 years to understand. I thought about the ochre bowl on the kitchen island, the side with character, the imperfection that was also the most interesting part. I thought about what it means to own something fully, not as a legal fact, not as a financial reality, but as a way of standing in a space and knowing without having to prove it that you belong there. Come to the front door, I said. Ring the bell, that's a start. Dorothy nodded. I stood up. I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on, got 3 mugs down from the cabinet, found the good tea, the loose-leaf orange pico I kept in the tin on the upper shelf, the one I saved for evenings that warranted it. While the water heated, I stood at the kitchen island with my hand on my grandmother's bowl and looked out at the dark backyard where the fig tree was resting invisible and patient, already beginning in whatever way fig trees begin the long preparation for what comes next. I made the tea. I carried it to the living room on a tray. I set a mug in front of Dorothy Sinclair in my house on my tray, and I sat back down in my armchair, and I said, "It's still hot. Be careful." And she wrapped her hands around the mug and said, "Thank you." And we drank our tea. I have thought about what I want to leave you with, and I keep coming back to the same thing. Not a lesson about property law or estate planning or how to protect yourself legally, though. All of those things matter, and I would encourage every one of you to know your rights and document your assets and find yourself a Patricia Osei. What I keep coming back to is something simpler. Know what is yours. Not in the aggressive way, not in the way that requires constant defense and announcement. In the quiet way. In the way my grandmother knew what was hers, her house, her bowl, her money, her judgment about who deserved it. She didn't spend her energy arguing about it. She spent her energy being certain of it, and that certainty was its own kind of protection. People will try to redefine what belongs to you. They will use the language of family and legacy and collective good. They will move your things and rename your rooms and come through your back door as though your threshold is a suggestion. And they will do this not because they are purely malicious. Dorothy Sinclair was not a purely malicious woman, but because human beings, when they are frightened and grieving and out of control, reach for whatever is within reach. The answer is not to fight constantly. The answer is to know completely, documentably, without ambiguity, what is yours. And then to wait with patience for the moment when that knowledge becomes necessary. My grandmother left me $340,000, and a bowl with a side that has character, and a porch where I drink my coffee in the mornings and watch the fig tree come back every spring without fail. She also left me this, the understanding that a woman who knows what she owns is very difficult to take anything from. I hope you remember that. Whatever time it is where you are, whatever country, whatever season, whatever version of this story you're living, I hope you know what is yours, and I hope you hold it accordingly.